Before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that I have a new book that is available on Kindle, and it is called Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. 50 pages long, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. Other than that, it's $3.99. So again, that is Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. And now, on with the podcast.
I've spent the past 2 years looking for my ex-girlfriend's killer, but no one will do it.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, May the 2nd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, rules for retrogrades, and the Mossad. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
It is possible to increase paper money income to any amount by debasing the currency, but real income can only be increased by working harder or more efficiently, saving more, investing more, and producing more. Henry Hazlitt. There's no free lunch. All attempts to increase income without increasing work, efficiency, saving, investment, and productivity are futile Worse, they are fraud. They are manipulations and acts of theft. Increasing the standard of living comes from human action, from the sum total of wealth which is embedded in productivity and investment. The rest is basically the stuff that put the Enron folks in jail.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 36. Young retrogrades should be neither sheep nor wolves, but sheep dogs. Young men should be taught to fight according to the mantra, never start fights, but finish them. Being smart or proficient at debate is no longer good enough in 2019 America. The time for flabby, comfortable, conservative leisure is at an end. The battle of ideas is quickening to the point at which it will soon become an actual battle. Hence, our last few rules involve grouping and preparatory criteria, who and how to prepare. We are mustering to stand and fight, not only retrogrades, but all men of goodwill who may be counted upon. But first, retrogrades must make themselves worthy of a fight. Rocky did not fight Apollo without a rigorous training regimen executed over a grueling period of time. Radicals categorically avoid non-rigged exchanges of ideas where they cannot interrupt or yell because they are aware that they are fated to fail in contests of ideas. It was the radical Marx who said that the purpose of philosophy is not understanding the world, but changing it. The radicals do not care if their formulations are correct. They only care about power. This explains why they turn to displays of semi-force and outright force instead of learning from their errors in debate. Only good men heed their past errors. Radicals simply learn how to implement force, giving the flimsy appearance of righteousness to wrong conclusions. A retrograde must be able to stand down any radical when the eventuality of the radical's defeat in the battle of wits inevitably coaxes forth the violent response from him. While such a statement did not correctly modify the status of the world a decade or two ago, it is one of the final and most important rules for retrogrades. Prepare for battle. Hopefully the battle won't be necessary, but this hope for peace grows more foolish as each day passes. To this end, the retrograde must maintain physical fitness in order to maintain, rather to regain, the imposing male standard of the West. While not every man has the time or training or talent to become proficient in the martial arts, virtually every man has 30 minutes per day to train at home with weights. That way, even a martially untrained retrograde can exercise an imposing presence in the public defense of ideas.
And that was Rule 36 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Mossad.
Admiral Mordecai Lyman stood in the freezing rain on Christmas Eve, watching 5 warships disappear into a Force 9 gale, knowing that if his plan failed in the next 17 minutes, Israel's Navy would be crippled for a generation. The wind howled across Cherbourg Harbor at nearly 60 miles per hour, whipping 20-foot waves against the breakwater. Most of France was celebrating Christmas. Families gathering for midnight mass, children dreaming of morning presents, port officials drinking wine in warm homes miles from the waterfront. Lyman stood alone on the pier, rain soaking through his coat, watching the dark shapes of 5 missile boats slip past the Fort de l'Est breakwater with no lights, no radio signals, nothing that could betray their departure. The boats had names now, Starboat 1 through 5, civilian vessels supposedly bound for oil exploration in the North Sea. The paperwork said so. The French Defense Ministry had approved the sale. Everything was legal, at least on paper. But the 80 Israeli naval officers crammed below decks weren't oil workers, and the boats weren't heading north toward Norway. They were turning south, toward the Mediterranean, toward home, toward a 3,000-mile dash across hostile waters, while half the world's navy searched for them. Limon checked his watch. 17 minutes since the first boat cleared the harbor mouth. 17 minutes to get beyond French territorial waters before anyone noticed they were gone. If a single French official decided to work late, if one harbor master checked the berths, if one radar operator happened to be paying attention instead of celebrating Christmas, fighter jets could be scrambled within the hour. The boats would be forced back to port, the operation exposed, and Israel would lose its only answer to a technological revolution that had already killed 47 Israeli sailors and rewritten the rules of naval warfare. The admiral pulled his collar up against the rain and kept watching the empty harbor, counting seconds, waiting for alarms that might never come or might arrive too late to stop what was already in motion. Behind him, the city of Cherbourg slept. Ahead, somewhere in that storm-tossed darkness, 5 boats were racing against time, weather, and the very real possibility that France's embarrassment would turn into France's fury before morning. This wasn't how nations fought wars anymore. No shots fired, no borders crossed illegally, no dramatic commando raids, just paperwork, timing, and the calculated exploitation of the single most dangerous assumption an intelligence service can make, that your adversary won't dare cross certain lines because the diplomatic cost is too high. France had made that assumption about Israel. Israel was proving it catastrophically wrong. And it all started 2 years earlier with a green flash on the horizon and a destroyer that never made it home. Before we go further into how Israel pulled off one of the most audacious intelligence operations of the Cold War, I want to let you know what this channel is about. Every single day, I bring you real spy stories, not Hollywood fiction, but actual operations with genuine tradecraft and the real human cost behind the headlines you've read. If you are fascinated by the world of espionage and intelligence operations, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. What happens next in this story will change how you understand the entire balance of power in the Mediterranean. All right, back to October 1967, and the moment that made the Cherbourg operation not just desirable, but absolutely essential for Israel's survival. The destroyer INS Eilat was on routine patrol 14 miles off Port Said on October 21st, 1967. The ship had been built in Britain in 1944 as HMS Zealous, a Z-class destroyer that fought in Arctic convoys during World War II before Israel purchased her in 1955. By 1967, she was 23 years old, but her crew of 199 officers and sailors were superbly trained, and the ship was manned for battle, as she always was during patrols near Egyptian waters. Commander Yitzhak Shoshan kept his ship in international waters, careful to avoid any provocation. The Six-Day War had ended 4 months earlier with stunning Israeli victories on land, but tensions remained high. Egyptian forces still controlled Port Said, and both sides were testing each other with patrols and probes that occasionally turned deadly. 3 months before this patrol, Eilat had chased 2 Egyptian torpedo boats, eventually sinking both, but only after they'd crossed back into Egyptian waters. That action had been celebrated in Israel and condemned furiously in Egypt, and Egyptian naval planners had been working on a response ever since. Around 5 in the afternoon, a lookout aboard Eilat spotted something unusual. A green flash on the horizon, coming from the direction of Port Said. Within seconds, the green glow turned orange-yellow as a dark object climbed into the sky and turned directly toward the destroyer. Someone on the bridge shouted the words that would change naval warfare forever. "Green rocket to starboard!" Shoshan's response was immediate and by the book. He called the crew to battle stations, ordered gunners to open fire, commanded maximum speed, and steered to present the ship's stern to the incoming missile, minimizing the target profile. His radio operator began transmitting to headquarters, getting out just the ship's call sign before everything went dark. A few of Eilat's Beaufort's guns opened fire, their shells tracking toward the incoming missile, but 40mm rounds designed to shoot down propeller aircraft had no chance against a Soviet Styx missile traveling at Mach 0.9. The missile's 1,000-pound warhead struck the boiler room on the starboard side and detonated. The explosion devastated the destroyer's central section, cutting all power, starting massive fires, and splitting the ship nearly in half. Men who'd been standing at their posts simply vanished. Others were thrown through the air or trapped below decks as seawater and burning fuel oil poured into compartments. The crew fought desperately to save their ship, but 2 minutes later a second missile arrived, fired from the same Egyptian Komar-class missile boat hidden inside Port Said harbor. Eilat had continued her turn after the first impact, and now her port side lay completely exposed. The second Styx struck with devastating precision, and the destroyer began to list severely as fires spread and compartments flooded. For nearly 2 hours the crew struggled to keep Eilat seaworthy, but the mathematics of buoyancy were working against them. Then, as rescue operations were being organized and survivors were being pulled from the water, a second Egyptian Komar boat fired 2 more missiles. The third Styx hit Eilat amidships, causing catastrophic damage and spreading the fires into sections that had somehow survived the first 2 impacts. The fourth missile went astray and crashed into the water nearby, but the underwater shock wave from its detonation injured many of the survivors already in the Mediterranean. 2 minutes after the third missile hit, INS Eilat capsized and sank. 47 Israeli sailors and officers were dead or missing. Over 100 more were wounded, many severely burned or suffering from shock and exposure. The pride of Israel's Navy, a ship that had fought in World War II and served through 2 Middle Eastern wars, was gone. Destroyed not by aircraft or submarines or enemy destroyers, but by small patrol boats firing missiles from the safety of a harbor 20 miles away. The sinking wasn't highly publicized at first, for reasons of national prestige and security, but its impact on Israeli naval planning was immediate and seismic. The Eilat had been ready for combat, her crew was alert and well-trained, her guns were manned and firing, and none of it mattered. The technological revolution represented by the Styx missile had rendered every conventional defense obsolete. A 75-ton patrol boat, costing a fraction of a destroyer's price, could now sink virtually any surface ship afloat from up to 25 miles away, and there was nothing the target ship could do to stop it. In Cairo, crowds gathered to cheer the 2 Komar-class boats when they returned to Port Said. In Israel, angry crowds surrounded Chief of Staff Yitzhak Rabin, and newspaper editorials demanded both vengeance and answers. 67 hours after the attack, Israel retaliated by shelling Port Suez with heavy mortars, destroying 2 of the city's 3 oil refineries. But everyone in Israeli Naval Command understood that artillery strikes on shore installations didn't address the fundamental problem. Soviet Styx missiles were spreading to every Arab navy in the Mediterranean. Egypt already had 20 Soviet-built OSA and Komar-class missile boats. Syria was receiving them. The technology that sank Eilat would soon be deployed across Israel's entire maritime frontier, and Israel's aging fleet of World War II-era destroyers, frigates, and corvettes would be helpless against it. The day of the great warship was over, at least for a small nation like Israel that couldn't afford to build supercarriers and cruisers with layered defense systems. Israeli naval planners reached a brutal conclusion. They needed an entirely new type of vessel. Small, fast, missile-armed platforms that could patrol Israeli shores and conduct offshore operations at high speed while evading enemy tracking and missiles. Ships that could fight and win in the new era of missile-to-missile combat. Ships that could survive long enough to get within range of their own weapons and turn Arab numerical superiority into a technological disadvantage. The good news was that Israel had already ordered exactly these kinds of vessels, designed in consultation with German shipyards and built to Israeli specifications at the construction's Mécaniques de Normandie shipyard in Cherbourg, France. 12 Sa'ar-class missile boats, sleek and fast, purpose-built for the Mediterranean, equipped with Israeli-developed Gabriel missiles. The contract had been signed in the mid-60s when France and Israel enjoyed close military cooperation. France had been Israel's main arms supplier, providing Mirage fighter jets, tanks, and nuclear technology. The relationship had been warm, productive, and seemingly stable. 7 of the 12 boats had already been delivered before the Six-Day War. They sat in Israeli ports, being outfitted with weapon systems and electronics. 5 more boats were complete and docked in Cherbourg, ready for sea trials and delivery. Israel had paid for all 12 boats in full, over $40 million, equivalent to roughly $350 million in today's currency. The boats weren't a luxury or a nice-to-have capability. After the sinking of Eilat, they represented Israel's only path to maritime survival. The bad news was that France had changed its mind about the entire relationship. In June of 1967, immediately after the Six-Day War ended, French President Charles de Gaulle imposed a full arms embargo on Israel. Publicly, he framed it as neutrality and even-handedness in the Middle East conflict. Privately, French foreign policy was pivoting toward the Arab world, cultivating relationships with oil-rich nations and positioning France as a counterweight to American influence in the region. The embargo was sweeping and unambiguous. No weapons, no military equipment, no spare parts, nothing that could be used for offensive operations. And that included the 5 Sa'ar-class boats sitting in Cherbourg Harbor. French officials were polite but firm. The embargo was non-negotiable. The boats would remain in France indefinitely. Israel could have its money back eventually, once the paperwork was processed and the political situation stabilized. In the meantime, the boats would stay exactly where they were, docked at Cherbourg, guarded by French naval personnel, going nowhere. Israeli naval crews who'd been stationed in Cherbourg to oversee construction and prepare for delivery were told they could stay and maintain the vessels, but under no circumstances could the boats leave French waters. French dockworkers began calling them les bateaux fantômes, the ghost boats. Ships that existed but couldn't sail, weapon systems that were complete but couldn't be used, $40 million worth of steel and electronics sitting idle, while Soviet missile boats proliferated across the Mediterranean and Israeli destroyers remained vulnerable to the same fate that claimed Eilat. Israeli naval intelligence ran the projections, and the results were grim. Without missile boats, Israel would lose technological parity within 5 years. The Navy would be downgraded to essentially a coast guard, capable of patrolling harbors but unable to contest control of sea lanes or protect maritime supply routes. In the next war, and everyone knew there would be a next war, Arab navies equipped with Soviet missiles would dominate the eastern Mediterranean, threatening the port of Haifa, where vital military supplies arrived from the United States and Europe, and the southern port of Eilat on the Gulf of Aqaba, where Iranian oil tankers delivered the fuel that kept Israel's economy running. The situation created fierce internal debates in Jerusalem. The foreign ministry urged restraint and patience. France would eventually fold, they argued. Don't humiliate an ally over 5 boats when the long-term relationship matters more. Wait for the political winds to shift, negotiate compensation, find another shipyard, build replacements in Israel, don't burn Paris for a generation over a temporary setback. The Navy disagreed violently with this assessment. There was no time to wait, no time to build replacements, and no guarantee France would ever release the boats through normal diplomatic channels. Mossad's logistics division sided with the Navy, though they warned that any covert operation would permanently damage relations with France and potentially trigger a broader European backlash. The Prime Minister's office stalled, unable to choose between diplomatic caution and operational necessity, and months passed while the boat sat in Cherbourg and the strategic situation deteriorated. By early 1969, Israeli intelligence confirmed what everyone feared. France would never formally release the vessels. Internal French government discussions mentioned quiet dismantling or repurposing the boats for the French Navy. The ghost boats of Cherbourg were becoming permanent ghosts, and Israel's maritime future was slipping away with them. That's when Mossad proposed something that wasn't quite theft and wasn't quite legal, something that existed in the gray zone between diplomacy and warfare. They proposed a non-kinetic recovery operation with 3 absolute rules. no force, no forged documents, and no false flags in traditional combat terms. Instead, they would use commercial misdirection, bureaucratic exploitation, and the one weapon that had proven consistently effective against Western governments: the assumption that certain actions were simply unthinkable because the diplomatic cost was too high. The operation needed an architect, someone who understood France intimately, who had connections at the highest levels of French government and military command, who could navigate the bureaucratic maze without leaving fingerprints, and who had the operational nerve to pull off a deception that would humiliate one of Europe's great powers on the world stage. Israeli defense officials had exactly one name that fit all those requirements. His name was Mordecai Lyman, though everyone called him Mocha. He was 45 years old, a retired rear admiral who'd formerly commanded the Israeli Navy, and now served as head of the Israel Defense Forces military purchasing mission in Paris. Lyman had been born in Palestine under British mandate in 1924, joined the Haganah's nascent naval unit in the 1940s, and gained his early experience in the British Merchant Marine, sailing the world and learning how naval bureaucracies actually functioned beneath their official procedures. After Israeli independence in 1948, Limon commanded vessels during the War of Independence, including the Heleno incident, where a Czech ship loaded with weapons bound for Egypt was intercepted and confiscated. In 1950, at age 26, he was promoted to commander of the entire Israeli Navy with the rank of general, the youngest officer in IDF history to reach that level. He'd left the Navy in 1954 to study business administration in the United States, then returned to Israel and worked in various capacities for the Defense Ministry before being chosen in 1962 to head Israel's procurement office in Paris, the most important position for foreign weapons acquisition. For 7 years, Limon had lived in France, building relationships, understanding how French military contracts actually got approved beneath the official channels, cultivating friendships with defense contractors and ministry officials, and using his family's connections to the Rothschilds to access circles that would normally be closed to foreign military officers. He knew which officials cared about rules and which ones cared about relationships. He understood the gaps between French government agencies where responsibility became ambiguous and decisions could slip through unnoticed. Most importantly, he understood the French assumption that certain provocations were simply impossible because no rational actor would risk the consequences. When Lyman was briefed on the Cherbourg situation in early 1969, he didn't propose a daring raid or a clever smuggling operation. He proposed something far more dangerous, making France give Israel the boats legally through proper channels, with signed paperwork and official approval, and only revealing what actually happened after the boats were safely beyond reach. The plan hinged on creating a front company that would appear to purchase the boats for legitimate civilian purposes, not a fake company with forged documents that could be exposed and prosecuted. A real company, legally registered, with actual business operations and a genuine civilian purpose that happened to require fast patrol boats. The company would negotiate with French authorities to purchase the boats that Israel could no longer legally own. France would approve the sale because the boats were going to a neutral third party for non-military use, and France could quietly recover some of the $40 million without admitting the embargo had created an awkward financial situation. The boats would be transferred legally, French authorities would have plausible deniability, and only after the boats reached Israel would the deception become clear. But Lehman needed help. He needed someone with credibility, someone the French would trust, someone with no obvious connection to Israel who could front the company and make the civilian story believable. He needed, specifically, a Norwegian. Lehman reached out to Milo Brenner, a retired Israeli Navy commander who now owned Maritime Fruit Carriers, a commercial shipping company that transported produce across Europe. Brenner had maintained contacts throughout the maritime industry, and one of those contacts was a Norwegian businessman named Ola Martin Seam, age 53, president of the Aker Group, Norway's largest shipbuilding firm. Siem was perfect. He was respected throughout the industry, had built his reputation on integrity, and possessed one additional quality that made him willing to consider Le Mans' proposal. He'd been a resistance fighter during World War II, hiding weapons, sheltering refugees, and conducting sabotage operations against Nazi occupation forces. He understood that sometimes legal and moral weren't the same thing, and he had an adventurer's appreciation for well-executed deception. When Brenner approached him, Siem listened to the proposal, asked pointed questions about the risks, and then agreed to help. He would provide his name, his reputation, and yet into his company's Oslo address for use by the front company. He would participate in negotiations with French authorities. He would maintain the fiction that he was purchasing the boats for offshore oil exploration in the North Sea. The boat specifications, high-speed, durable construction, able to handle rough seas, were perfectly suited for supply runs to oil platforms, so the story was at least technically plausible. In November of 1969, a company called Starboat was incorporated in Panama with an Oslo address that was actually just a mailbox Siem had agreed to provide. The company's stated purpose was delivering supplies to North Sea oil rigs. Its board of directors included Siem and several officers who were actually Mossad operatives, including Benjamin Vered, one of Mossad's most senior commanders. The paperwork was clean, the corporate structure was legitimate, and the business purpose was believable enough that French customs and defense officials wouldn't look too closely at who really controlled the operation. Now came the theatrical part. Le Mans had to make France believe the sale was real, while simultaneously making sure Israeli crews would be the ones operating the boats when they left Cherbourg. He began negotiations with French officials, playing the role of disappointed Israeli military attaché who'd been ordered to resolve the boat situation peacefully. He met with Defense Minister Michel Debré and proposed that Israel formally waive all claims to the 5 boats in exchange for France returning the purchase price. France agreed immediately. This solved their diplomatic problem elegantly. Then Starboat appeared with an offer to purchase the boats from the Cherbourg shipyard at the same price. Felix Amiot, the shipyard owner, received a letter from Siem expressing interest in acquiring boats capable of high speeds in rough seas. Amiot informed the French Defense Ministry, which called Le Mans to ask if Israel would object to this sale. Le Mans waited a few days, long enough to appear thoughtful, before confirming that Israel had no objection. Foreign Minister Maurice Schumann praised the arrangement in writing, an excellent transaction that should serve as a model. Bravo. 2 contracts were signed in mid-December. The first canceled Israel's original purchase and returned the $40 million. The second had Starboat purchasing the same boats at the same price from the shipyard. On paper, Israel no longer owned the boats. France had returned the money. Starboat, a Norwegian company, had legally purchased 5 patrol boats for civilian use. The embargo remained intact. French law was being followed, and everyone could claim the situation had been resolved professionally. There was just one small detail. Starboat requested that Israeli crews be allowed to operate the boats during the delivery voyage to Norway, since the Israelis had years of experience with these specific vessels and their systems. The French Defense Ministry approved this request without objection. It made practical sense and cost France nothing. 80 Israeli naval officers, ratings, and sailors began arriving in Cherbourg throughout December, traveling in pairs, entering through different European cities, carrying tourist documentation, staying in different hotels. They filtered into the city quietly, maintaining civilian cover, avoiding Hebrew conversations in public, keeping their presence as invisible as possible. The skeleton crews already stationed in Cherbourg with the boats were reinforced until each of the 5 vessels had a full combat-ready crew living aboard, preparing the boats for a journey that officially was heading north to Norway, but actually would turn south the moment they cleared French waters. The deception's next phase required building a routine that would desensitize French authorities to the boat's activities. The Israeli crews, now operating under the Starboat name, began taking the vessels, renamed Starboat 1 through 5, Wentensitkis, on short training voyages north into the Atlantic. The pattern was established over weeks. Boats would depart for a day or two, test systems, return to port, refuel, repeat. French harbor officials got used to seeing the boats come and go. The routine became normal, boring, beneath notice. Just another commercial maritime operation in a busy French port. But the operation nearly fell apart twice before the boats ever left. Israeli naval personnel, despite strict orders to maintain cover, kept making mistakes. Hebrew was overheard in port bars. Crew members showed excessive curiosity about harbor schedules. One Israeli sailor was questioned by French police after a minor altercation, and though he maintained his cover, the incident got logged in French counterintelligence files.
And that is the end of this half of this episode of Mossad, called How Israel Pulled Off the Greatest Naval Heist in Cold War History. And the second half will be on Tuesday. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.